As promised, we talked a little bit before about Grant Wood, but we're going to look at some artists first we'll look at Grant Wood, but let's review this. These are the techniques that an artist uses that create space. We drew this on one of the earlier videos, remember? Things get smaller as they go back in space. They're being overlapped. They're closer to the horizon line as they makes them smaller, less contrast. You're using less of the value scale further away. You're using whole value scale close up or just a little bit of the value scale further away. You see less details, so you can read the word tennis balls here, less details. So we're going to focus a little bit on color. So again, cool colors recede, warmer colors advance. So let's move forward. And remember, I talked about in the last video looking at Grant Wood. So you're wondering, who's Grant Wood? You probably know who he is, but you don't know who he is, if that makes sense. Let's look. Say, I recognize this. This is by Grant Wood. This is not a great example of what we're talking about, but I did want to show you this so you know who we're talking about when we talk about Grant Wood. This is his very famous painting called American Gothic. If you ever get to Chicago, make sure you see this at the Institute. So this is a Grant Wood painting as well. He is from Iowa. He lived on a farm for a while, but he also lived in a city. But he loved the farm, and he really liked to honor the farmer. So Grant Wood is showing us all of those things that we've talked about. If you look, he's got nice layers, so the layers are overlapping each other. Up here, watch for the red pen here. Up here, right here, is a close layer. There's a lot of detail in this layer. There's a lot of marks that are going like this. You have a lot of contrast in the plow. There's some very light lights. There's just detail and patterns and contrast. So then you have this layer right here. And it is being overlapped by the front layer, and it is overlapping further away layers. So there's your overlap. Now look at these lines in this field, as they go back in space, they get more faded. They also get closer together, and there's less detail. Okay, so he is actually showing us how to do a lot of this stuff. Then you have this layer coming up here, and then another layer, and then a layer way in the back. So as things, if this is your horizon line, things are closer to the horizon line. This guy is further away from this than this guy because it's closer to the horizon line. He's also making these haystacks get smaller and smaller and smaller as they go back in space. Way back here, let's see, way back here is a little field very similar to this field up here with the haystacks, but it's very faded, it's grayed out, there's less detail, there's not any clarity, there's very little contrast. You're really in the middle or the light part of the value scale here. So he's showing us all of these things that we've been talking about. I want you to pay attention a little bit to his patterns because we're going to hit this a lot today in this video. So look at the patterns here. These little scallop, he has these little scallop things going on. And then inside the scallops, he's got, and they're a little more irregular than what I've got, but it's like smashed down wheat or something, or they haven't plowed it yet. Also, these haystacks right here, these little triangle haystacks are creating a pattern. They're in a line going back. And then where you cut the hay or the wheat or whatever this is, there's little dots going back in space. And then even the shadows here are making a pattern. So he really hits a lot of different aspects of what we've been talking about, plus some extra things. This is another Grant Wood painting, and you can see all the same things. I love the layers of hills, and we're up on a hill, and we're looking down this road, and there's a cornfield. That cornfield on the left, I can see the corn. It's in a pattern as well. I see all the details. I see lights and darks. Then as I move closer to the horizon line, any field that is further away and closer to the horizon line, you don't see as much pattern or detail. Way back here, it's very, very faded, very grayed out. Let's look at another very famous artist who is approaching this whole idea with no color. Now, this is a sketch for one of Vincent Van Gogh's later paintings, but I wanted you to see this one because, again, look at the layers he's using. You've got this front layer here. You even have these grassy layers here in the front, way in the front. And then you've got just layer after layer after layer after layer after layer after layer. So I get quieter as I go further away. But what I want you to notice here is that he's got these layers overlapping, just kind of like Grant Wood, but his approach is completely different. He's completely, now later when he painted this, he does all of these things with the paint brush, these marks. He's very linear with his work. So up here, you've got a different kind of mark here than here. And there's some contrast. This is much darker because the marks are closer together. And this is kind of like random. These little guys are kind of random marks. And then these lines are much closer together and bolder. Okay, so they're changing with each layer. And then I'm kind of going a little more scribble scrabbly here. And I like this one because they're big fat lines and close together, and then they get further apart, and the value changes a little bit. Now here he's using dots in this layer right here. There's just speckles and dots, and then there's this other layer of more vertical lines. And the buildings are getting less detailed as they go back and closer to the horizon line. Way back here, he's just creating just some lines like this of the trees to create kind of a medium value with very little detail going all the way across the painting. Okay, so another famous artist that kind of reminds me of some of the things you see in this Grant Wood painting. Let's go back to it and look at this tree. And this tree, and this tree. Look at that, the layers of the triangles kind of wisping out. So let's skip over this. And those Grant Wood paintings kind of made me think that maybe Dr. Seuss looked at his. But Dr. Seuss is following the exact same things. This is from the book, Oh, the Places You'll Go. But close up, the trees are bigger. Look at this big tree. It's overlapping everything else, kind of. Broke the rule here, didn't it? But it's bigger, it's overlapping. And then as I move further away, the bottoms of the trees are closer to the horizon line. They're getting smaller. Okay, there's less detail. Look at the tree, the trunk of the tree. There's much less detail here than here. So even Dr. Seuss is following the rules. Now look at the color here. This is like a bright blue, and this blue of the water has yellow in it. It's a little warmer blue. So I want to also look at a couple contemporary artists that are using the same thing. A contemporary artist is somebody who's working during our lifetime. So this is Annie OBrien Gonzalez. Pay close attention to her use of color. Look at these purples and greens up here and up front, and look how they fade and cool and get very light and less contrast further away. Okay, it gets very more faded and cooler as you go back. There's more blue in all the colors. But also she is very interested in layers. In fact, her layers have layers, and there's like almost stripes inside the layers and a little bit of pattern, a little bit of the Grant Wood kind of pattern in it too. Now, this is Rebecca Vincent. And this down-to-earth painting kind of reminds me of Grant Wood as well, with kind of looking down a hill. A real strong foreground, and then incorporating patterns. And again, you can see back here, you're much more faded. There's less detail. It's bluer. Okay, and up front, I'm much warmer. My patterns are much stronger, and I've got a lot of contrast up front. And then you've got all that overlap going. So next we're going to move to a sketchbook, and we're going to actually try to do some of these and figure out how you're going to make your art. I'm going to give you some ideas, and then you're going to go off and make some art with whatever you have available to you.